Got one. Yeah. What's up, guys?
Really? Again?
Out of all the games you could be picking?
Look, Super Black Bass, by far and away, the best fishing game ever made for the Nintendo Entertainment System. It's a big one.
That doesn't make it a good game, though.
But Bass, I mean, synthetic banjo, you gotta go past the weeds, get that lunker in. I mean, yeah. Fishing. It's just, no. Come on, buddy, we talked about this. It's not real. You don't even like bass. It's not a salmon. Lost it. Shouldn't you be hibernating or something?
Everyone, welcome to another episode of Unqualified Experts. I'm your host, Braden Gardner, and I have a special guest with us here today.
I'm Rob Seidel, also known as Soreless in the gaming community.
Rob is an expert in pretty much all things retro gaming, so we really wanted to bring him on to talk about some of the best games ever released on the SNES. As you've probably noticed, Shane is stepping away for a little bit here to let an actual expert school us on how it's done. So we're going to talk about what we each feel are the top 5 games that really influenced the success of the Super Nintendo. And if you want to catch Rob's streams on Twitch, twitch.tv/Soreless. I'll have a link on screen as well as in the description below for you. So, Rob, I'm dying to know, start us off with what you think your first pick is for the best SNES games.
Well, coming in at number 5, I have to choose UN Squadron. I love shoot 'em ups, and this is Capcom's release that they put on the Super Nintendo, and it's a horizontal shooter that's a licensed game based on the Japanese manga and anime of Area 88. And with customizing your arsenal, this hits a lot of the things that I like in games, because of these game features, it offers great replay value, and with a lot of Capcom games, you get an amazing soundtrack. The game can be a bit more forgiving than most shoot 'em ups, because one shot doesn't kill you right away. It puts you in a danger zone and you've got a health bar. And once that danger zone goes away, then you can receive another hit without dying immediately. So it's pretty forgiving in that regard, and it's not randomized, so you can learn the patterns of all the different enemies and actually progress your skills without having to rely on luck and dodging bullet hells.
I really liked this game. I actually had never played it before, because I only apparently found a certain selection of SNES titles and then never bothered to broaden my horizon as a kid, because kids are dumb. And boy, this game is hard, but it's a lot of fun. I really liked it. You have a variety of different weapons to choose from. Even if you completely suck at this game like I do, you eventually do make enough money that you're able to buy better planes, and in turn be able to buy more special weapons for your planes to make it a little easier to succeed. And like Rob said, the game is very forgiving as far as what you're able to get away with. I figured out the damage system pretty quickly, and as long as you don't just completely crash and burn when you get hit and just walk right into all of the bullets, you can usually recover pretty well until you get far enough along that you're just in the danger zone permanently, in which case you're probably doomed in pretty short order. But it's a solid game, and really a good example of what shooters on the SNES were capable of. I'm going to definitely be spending more time sending planes and pilots to their doom.
Yeah, it's definitely got some solid graphics as well that still hold up to today. Kind of modern warfare.
Agreed, it was a very pretty game. And if you suck at the first level enough, they're nice enough to give you another mission where you're getting attacked by enemies at your base. I didn't beat either of them.
It takes some time and practice.
That's fair. Well, my number 5 pick is an absolute classic and a franchise that spanned years and many games. But it all started with the first one, and it was Mega Man X. Mega Man X really turned classic Mega Man on its head, and I just remember being so blown away by how much better you were than Mega Man Classic. You had the ability to jump on walls. Your Buster was just better as far as charge shots. It was just a huge blast of plasma. Nothing could stand up to you at all in the intro stage. Until you meet Vile and his armored mech, and he proceeds to show you just where you are in the new pecking order. It's a rough come down for your first time, but then the game introduces you to Zero, who is a secondary character who is way better than you, and sets himself up to be your goal for what to aspire to. And you do that through the course of the game. There's just so much nuance in the level design. There are lots of hidden power-ups ranging from life upgrades to armor upgrades to reusable energy tanks. And the gameplay is just solid all the way through. There is one drawback, however, and that's that you really need the foot parts to get anything done in that game. And if you don't know to start with Chill Penguin stage when you get to the boss select, you're gonna have a rough go of it until you finally find them.
One of my favorite things about Mega Man X is just how it does the tutorial to teach you how to play in the very first beginning stage. It teaches you the different things you can do, like the slides, the wall jumps, the charging of your beam, and the different types of enemies you might encounter. So that, and of course, it's a Capcom game, and it's got an amazing soundtrack. So those were my favorite things about that one.
Some of the most amazing chiptunes to grace the 16-bit console, and yeah, the intro stage is actually one of the best selling points. Rob's absolutely right. Getting an actual in-game tutorial kind of giving you a chance to learn how you are better than classic Mega Man if you're coming in from the NES games, or even Mega Man 7, is huge. Like, that was revolutionary game design for its time, and there are any number of different sources that will extol the virtues of that, but it just can't be overstated how important that was to making that game as good as it was.
Yeah, and it wasn't like a hand-holding either. They didn't pause the game to tell you, now do this, now do that. You learned it as you went, and it was just really well done.
Kind of a shame we backslid with X5 on the PlayStation. Thanks, Alia.
Okay, and next up for me, my number 4 pick was Actraiser. It's not necessarily a very popular one that everybody's heard of, but it's this weird mix of like half city simulator combined with half platformer, and it's not something that anybody would ever think to combine or think that it would work, but they did it very well. You awaken in the temple in the sky and provide the angel that greets you when you wake up with your name, and then they kind of give you a backstory letting you know that you're a godlike master that lost a battle to Tanzra, who in Japan's copy of the game was called Satan, and this had a lot more religious elements, but Nintendo doesn't want to offend anybody in the US, so they scrubbed things out as best they could to avoid any issues with that. But you have to defeat Tanzra and his 6 lieutenants, and you lead the people of the world into prosperity by clearing out their environment, helping them overcome different obstacles. Like there's trees in the way of being able to build, so you can call down lightning to break up those trees and clear rocks or monster spawns and stuff like that. So it's just kind of a neat mix that really breaks up the game. It's a very solid platformer overall, and it's got great music. It features a lot of capabilities of the Super Nintendo, with you like skydiving down into the monster level to do your platforming, and it's basically a visual buffet for you, because these, like the overworld city building, they're pretty meh graphics. They're not anything special, but the beauty of the actual platformer levels compares to none other. And you have your typical life bar, basic attack, and a magic attack you can call down. As you progress your cities, they can find ancient treasures that might be in the form of being able to cast your spell in extra time, or being a new spell that you didn't have before. So, like for that, it keeps me coming back and playing it on a very regular basis, because it's a really fun game.
I really enjoyed this. Getting to play this for my first time was an absolute treat. This is one of those games where, just because it didn't get a lot of mainstream attention compared to some of the other more popular games on the console, doesn't mean it doesn't belong in the top 5 of anybody's list. It's so good. You get to do a little bit of real-time strategy with getting your towns set up, helping them expand, eventually getting to do things like build bridges, casting your spells to help clear trees, or get some water to places that need water. All the while, you're busy trying to shoot enemies on the overworld map, keep them from destroying your town's houses or abducting your citizens. And then eventually, you move from the overworld RTS view to a side-scroller, where you basically get to do some platforming, fight a bunch of enemies, and then take down a boss before going back to the overworld. It was such a robust game, and like Rob said, it's a visual buffet for the eyes. It's just a treat to play from start to finish. The side-scroller portion is considerably difficult. You are going to die a bunch there if you're playing this for your first time, but it's not unfairly difficult. It's challenging without being unfair.
Yeah, getting hit while you're jumping isn't certain death like it is in some games.
Yeah. Glad to see that relic of the past stay there. All right, well, my number 4 pick is one that if you owned an SNES or knew a buddy who had one, you probably played this game a lot. And it was also one of the launch titles for the SNES in Japan. Super Mario World. And what more is there to say about this game that hasn't already been said? It somehow managed to be a worthy successor to Super Mario Bros. 3 on the NES by giving you superior platforming, extremely responsive controls, a wide array of different levels to explore. You also got the ability to kind of pick your own path. Even from the start of the game, you could choose 2 maps leading in 2 different directions to progress. And then once you got over to the Donut Plains, which is basically the second world of the game, you start finding levels that appear as red dots instead of yellow, indicating that there are multiple ways to beat that level. And in turn, you were rewarded with multiple paths to kind of traverse these different lands to get to where you wanted to go, or to secret levels that made life super easy for getting around, but were often just supremely difficult to get through. But you don't have to get to any of that to beat the game. So if you're more of a casual player who does not want to go through the blistering try-hard levels, great. If you want to be a completionist and get through every single level of the game, there is an absolute ton of replay value. And the 2-player makes it easy to alternate between players to ensure everybody's getting a fair turn, which I imagine stopped a lot of fights between kids as they grew up.
Yeah. You could also lend lives, which was really nice.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was my favorite thing, was being able to pick your own path, and the fact that so many levels had multiple ways to beat it. It gave a whole new level of not only replay but just like intrigue to the game, to be able to find the secrets and find the Star World, and if you really wanted to, you could skip everything and go straight to Bowser.
Definitely solid.
Yeah, very great game. Okay, for my number 3 pick, another Enix title here, and also one that not as many people have heard of, Ogre Battle, the March of the Black Queen.
Yeah.
There we go. So it's a great turn-based tactical RPG by Enix, with a dark political storyline. You start off the game by answering various questions to this wizard named Warren, and he'll show you a tarot card that you're going to get into your inventory and ask you a question like, which of these traits is the most important in an emperor, and just kind of get a personality profile of you, which ultimately impacts how your character's stats come out, his abilities, and what starting units he gets. And being a tactical RPG, you control several groups of allies that can have up to 5 units in the team, and you get to select your leader of the unit and choose the placement as well as the row that each unit is in. And although you don't control each one in like you would in a normal RPG where you would tell, okay, now this one gets to attack, this one casts a spell, they have different abilities based on whether they're in the front row or back row. And so you can kind of use that to your advantage to protect your mages by putting them in the back row so that they can cast a spell instead of trying to hit somebody with their staff. The objective on each map is to liberate the cities and the ultimate capital. And by liberating cities, you earn more of the currency so that you can pay your troops to deploy them, and you can buy stuff at stores, and you get the choice at each of your cities to draw from the tarot deck to get another card. And these cards all have different effects that can impact outer world events, like what time of day it is, or what kind of reputation you have with all the other cities, or they can just have in-combat effects where you use it to gain some sort of advantage, whether it's healing or massive damage and stuff like that.
So
Yeah.
this game was fascinating for me to play through because, again, Rob's doing a good job of broadening my horizons. I'd never played this one before either, but I was drawn in by the tarot reading personality profile right from the get-go. Like, it gives you kind of a chance to give your character an identity, and it's super robust. Like, I was not expecting to sit down for 5-10 minutes just to go through this battery of questions, but by the time we actually got into the game, I had a good idea of who we were about from the very start, and then the tutorial's actually not too bad either. You go through and they basically walk you through liberating cities, making sure you're talking to people, making sure you're paying attention to the time of day, using that to get different information from the same place depending on the time of day, and ultimately leading up to a fairly easy boss fight where you get to experience the battle system and use the tarot cards that you picked up as potential weapons. And regrettably, I found out that yes, they did make sure that the bosses were immune to the death card. That was very sad, but it also shows that they actually bothered to balance how the tarot cards actually worked, which was super cool. Like, this is a game that if you love strategy games, this is a predecessor to Civ in a lot of ways in its current incarnation.
Another thing that's great is there's special characters that you get and encounter throughout the game, and those characters have different interactions with each other, much like you might in like a Fire Emblem, where it can impact the story and whether or not you recruit this person or get vengeance on them, depending on who you've sent over there. And there's so many different upgrade paths for all of your units to just become usually significantly stronger and have some pretty awesome attacks.
Very solid pick. I cannot believe this did not get more press back in its day. That it's kind of criminal it didn't.
Mm-hmm. It did get a re-release on PS1, which they didn't make any changes to it that I know of, and it's literally the same release of Ogre Battle: The March of the Black Queen.
Way cool. Okay. Well, my number 3 pick is going to be a surprise to literally nobody because I play a randomized version of it on Twitch at least once a week. So let's go ahead and get the elephant in the room squared away. Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. So, for those who grew up with the NES and got to play the first Zelda game, it was one of the first true open world experiences. And then Nintendo did what Nintendo was notorious for doing back in the day and took the sequel in a totally different direction, which I also loved. A lot of people didn't. And then they really came back to form on this third one. Link to the Past really delivers an open world experience that's honestly very, very good looking considering the era it came out in. You're given a clear direction on where you're supposed to go from the start. You go into the castle, you help guide Zelda to the sanctuary, and then you're off to go collect pendants for the sage that tells you that you're special in the Eastern Desert. And then you collect the pendants, and suddenly you find yourself battling a dark wizard, and then taken to a world that is just completely corrupted compared to the first one, the Dark World. And you use a magic mirror to go from the Dark World to access places in the Light World that you couldn't access before. Huge variety of items compared to the first one. You move up from having 8 items, basically, that you can toggle between to 20. Plus a bunch of supplementary items to boot that allow you to dash, or improve your armor, or swim, or keep your form in the Dark World. Because when you get there the first time, you're a bunny, and you can do nothing other than walk around and use your mirror. I cannot praise this game enough, and the randomizer that the Link to the Past randomizer community has put together really has breathed a ton of new life into this game for me. It's never quite the same experience twice. There's all sorts of fun that you can have going around and finding different paths to actually successfully complete the game. Truly just a masterpiece of the console.
I can't agree more. It's one of the best first-party titles they've probably ever made. It's definitely my favorite Zelda game that they've ever made. And it's just, they pretty much did nothing wrong in it. They made it feel like you could explore everywhere and get to everything once you found certain items. And there's just so much to explore. I can't say enough nice things about it. It was a great game.
And if you got stuck, they had the crystals in the Dark World numbered for you so that if you basically couldn't figure out where to go, you had that going for you if you decided you wanted a more structured environment. Like, it's almost the perfect game. Like, I can't think of anything bad to say about it.
Yeah. It's like it even got a remake pretty much on the 3DS because it was such a great game, and that one felt so much like this that I liked it a lot too, but this is still favorite one.
Link Between Worlds was a worthy sequel to this game, and it managed to be a worthy sequel without retreading the exact same ground, which is very, very hard to do.
Yeah. Okay. My number 2 will get some pushback from others. Final Fantasy II.
Hey, a game I've played!
Also known as Final Fantasy IV.
Ooh, fancy.
So this one was my gateway into more developed storyline for an RPG with a great soundtrack and characters that I cared about. Uh, it just really, like, I was already interested in RPGs, but this really took it to the next level when I found out, well, you can have cutscenes and these characters that have personality, and that was great to not just have those cookie cutter fighter, black mage, white mage from Final Fantasy 1. I've always been a huge fan of Final Fantasies, and this did not disappoint me at all. My friend and I spent many hours playing this together, marveling at the rich spell graphics and the variety of enemies. Uh, Although Final Fantasy 3 was mechanically a much better game than 2, I feel like I was more drawn to this storyline and to these characters I had more attachment to. Uh, Later in life, when I learned that this game was actually Final Fantasy 4, I also found out that they removed various abilities from different characters and some of the spells. They simplified the items because they didn't think that we would understand or appreciate a true JRPG where you have unique items to cure each individual ailment, and the ones that cure everything are pretty rare. So I appreciated getting to go through and play the game as it was originally meant to be, to get a fuller appreciation for what it was.
And that's completely fair. Like, Final Fantasy IV is a stellar RPG. Yeah, having played the Steam version more recently than the Super NES version, you can definitely tell Nintendo sanded the rough edges off in the SNES release. Like, I was going in and I got a heal when I was going in and playing through the early part of the game, and I was just like, surely that's not a catch-all for all conditions. And it not only was, it was accessible from the very first shop at a reasonable price.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that is kind of an unfortunate byproduct of that era, and it's hardly the first title in the series to really be sanded down for the Western audience really learning how JRPGs work, Mystic Quest being the most egregious example.
Yes.
But Rob's right, the gameplay is very solid. You have a lot of useful abilities, a wide cast of characters that you get to meet and have party up with you, a vast array of magic, and you get to meet people who are pretty badass and show you where some of your characters who are coming up in the world will be heading later in the game. Like, meeting up with Tella and actually having a character who basically has every spell in the game, and he's, what, the third character you find? You get Cecil, and then Rydia, and then Tella?
That'll be fourth, because of Cain.
Right, Cain.
Yep.
So, fourth, sorry. And you just get him so early in the game, and you just get to throw around this badass magic, and you just get to feel so powerful, and all the while you're still bringing everyone else up. You're working with Cecil, actually wrestling with his loyalty to his kingdom and what he should do. Rydia is my personal favorite character because every party needs a child advisor, and she symbolizes that need perfectly in 4.
Another thing that I noticed they had changed too in the transition to 2 versus 4 is they kind of make everything seem a little more innocent. Cecil and Cain don't realize that they're bringing a bomb to the Valley of Mist to destroy the city. Whereas in the original one, they knew what it was, they were against it, but they still did it because they were following orders.
That's dark. I understand why Nintendo might have sanded that off back then.
I also like how, and this is an element that they really incorporated in Mystic Quest that I liked, was that bosses had different forms or different sprites depending on what stage they were at in their battle, and that was something new and pretty cool.
And you get introduced to that really early. Like, the Mist Dragon is your first major boss fight, and you have 2 phases that you learn how to work with, so that, and if you don't bother to read the text or work with them, you get punished.
Yes, most definitely.
No, stellar choice. Me? I'm gonna be that guy who's gonna point out the elephant in the room. Final Fantasy III is my number 2 pick, and a lot of people will agree and a lot of you will push back on that as well, and that's completely fair. It's kind of hard to slot this as my number 2 for best game on the SNES. Honestly, my first 2 picks are going to be interchangeable depending on the day you ask me. But since we have 6 out, let's talk about 6. Released as 3 in the States, you have a very robust cast of characters, much like you got from Final Fantasy II. And you're accumulating them, and everyone has their own motivations for teaming up and ultimately trying to bring down the big bad, which in the first part of the game is the Empire and the Emperor, who are trying to basically use magic to rule the world. And you get to a pivotal point where you can stop him, and it looks like you're about to, and then you lose. And the real big bad shows up. And if you've played 3, Kefka is probably the best stereotypical villain that you've probably gotten the opportunity to go up against in any RPG on the SNES, and it isn't close. He's just so easy to hate, and you can clearly see where his motivations are. He wants power. He cares about himself. He's willing to do whatever it takes to get to where he wants to go. And that includes literally destroying the world. Losing this pivotal battle takes you from the world of balance to the world of ruin. And the world of ruin sucks. Areas that you had access to in the world of balance, like the Serpent Trench, closed, because it's above water now. All of your friends that you spent the first half of the game acquiring scattered to the 4 winds as you get flung from an airship. And you have to literally put the band back together. And you can choose, after a point, how many people you actually go and get back. And depending on your decisions, party members can die permanently. You might go to the final fight missing a few. You can find a few extras that you couldn't find in the first part of the game. There's just so much going on, and you can also customize every character with the robust magic system and espers, and level them pretty much however you see fit. Most are clearly tailored to go in a direction, but they don't have to stay in that direction. However, this robust array of options does come with the drawback of analysis paralysis, and this is the most common complaint I've heard about Final Fantasy III is there's almost too much going on. I don't personally mind it myself. I think that it really just adds replay value to an already stellar RPG, and it's not always easy to get that replay value in there to begin with. But if you're willing to sit down and crunch the numbers, you can do a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing about 3/6 is the fact that not only can you build your final party to be whoever you want, because that's one thing I really wish they had in 2, but everybody could learn any spell. And like you said, just because somebody's tailored towards one thing doesn't mean you can't put them towards another. Like with the espers, they, as you level up, can increase certain stats depending on which one you have equipped. So you can really make your party whatever you want it to be. And that's probably one of my favorite things about it. And of course the music. I'm a big soundtrack junkie, so.
Probably the best soundtrack on the
Yes.
console, and that's a tough claim to fame.
Yeah, and if you hadn't touched on it, I completely agree. Kefka is probably one of the best villains in an RPG, in my mind, at least. He's perfect.
It's just so satisfying to bring him
Yes.
down, and the laugh. Truly one of the greats, and if you really like an epic tale, like if you're really itching for one, this is it on the console. This is a literal epic. And you almost get 2, because you have the story broken into 2 parts, basically.
The only thing I wasn't a fan of in 3/6 was at the point when you have to split into 3 parties to go your separate ways and do your separate things. I kind of always feel like that drags on for me a little bit. And I don't know exactly what they could have done to make it better, but I just want to get on to the story that everybody's participating in.
That's fair. I found that the party split was actually more obnoxious in the Phoenix Cave, personally, because that cave is enormous for a side dungeon, and it's optional, so you don't have to do it, but not doing it means you don't get lockback. So you basically have to go do it, because he's the only one who can really steal from people.
Yeah, that was another great thing about it too, is like if you don't wait for like Shadow, you lose him permanently.
Mm-hmm.
And just things like that where your decisions can actually impact the rest of the game.
And it's just not at all obvious. Like, you don't know you screwed up. Like, Shane only found out that you could save Shadow when we did the last SNES video last year. And he's just like, wait, you can save Shadow? I was like, yeah, you didn't know that? No?
And I just found out recently that after Kefka destroys the world, when you get trapped on an island with Sid, you don't have to let him die.
Nope.
Never knew that.
It's real hard to get him to live, but if you're willing to wait out the fish and find the good ones, you can save Sid, and that's also just one of those neat little Easter eggs, because canonically, he dead, but you can save him. It's really cool.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think that brings us to our number one picks. So we've talked about a lot of great games already. What's your number one pick for the best, most influential game on the SNES, Rob?
I'm going to preface this with, whenever I'm asked what's my favorite game on the Super Nintendo, I always have to chop out all RPGs, because there's just so many great ones, and it is my favorite genre, so I feel that it's unfair to all the other great games when I include them. So my favorite is Super Metroid.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure many people can agree that it's such a great game. It's aged so well. And the graphics and the soundtrack were always great. The additional abilities that you could find, or tools and weapons, suits, they just added so much more to it compared to the first and second iterations. And like, they just took it to a whole new level. The only bad thing I can ever say about Super Metroid is wall jumps. I hate them. I cannot master them. I've heard people tell me how to do it, and it's just the timing doesn't make logical sense to me when I'm trying to execute it. But like, beyond that, it's hard to say anything new about this game, because it's played so much. It's speed run, and it's just such a great game. Another stellar first party title.
Truly, this is a game that really perfected the Metroid formula for going around a huge open world that you slowly get more access to as you get different weapons, different beams for your cannon, different types of missiles, different types of bombs for the morph ball. This game has just tons of exploration opportunity, and it can be a lot. It's not an easy game compared to something like Link to the Past. Super Metroid has a much higher difficulty curve to contend with, and so many collectibles. Like, 100%ing this game is an achievement, and you don't have to do it, but it adds to the fun, in my opinion. It's such a well-designed game, and very influential for a lot of the Castlevania games down the road that kind of go along the Metroidvania route of exploration. This is the Metroid part of the Metroidvania. Sure, you had the NES and the Game Boy titles before this one, but this really showcased what you could do with a huge map system and different layers of the planet.
I also remember as a kid just being blown away by the initial intro video where they had actual voice. Like, that was not something I'd encountered in a video game yet, and that was just so amazing.
I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, that was a real rarity on the SNES, largely because the titles that did it on the NES did it so badly.
Very badly. And like, another thing I like about it is it does throwbacks to the original Metroid and to Return of Samus to kind of tie everything in. And I really like when games let you like go back to like that opening level in the original Metroid and stuff like that. It's just a lot of fun, and I like nostalgia. So
Truly a great game. And if you're one of the crazy people who does the randomizer crossed with Link to the Past, more power to you. That is not for me. That is too much. A bridge too far. But the achievement in crossing the two games over, props where they're due. That's a heck of an accomplishment.
Yeah. So what is your number one pick?
So, I'm not prepared to chop the RPG arm off when asked about my favorite. I understand it's not fair to the other genres because the SNES has such a robust library of great games. Narrowing down to 5 was really hard. I regret that I wasn't able to put games like Super Castlevania 4 on here, but I said my 1 and 2 picks were very interchangeable, and that means they're both RPGs, and it's really hard to argue with the majesty that's Chrono Trigger. It's just an amazing game that was super ambitious as an RPG. Like, you've got a huge library of great games that already exist in the RPG space between your Breath of Fire and your Secret of Mana, and there were a few others that were really good too that I actually wrote down and then didn't remember to read. Oh yeah, all 3 of the Final Fantasies that came out on the SNES preceded Chrono Trigger. It's a shame we didn't get 5, but 4 and 6, or 2 and 3 as they were released here, were phenomenal games that Chrono Trigger had to compete against. And then they took it a step further and threw time travel into the mix, which is almost impossible to do correctly. And they not only did it correctly, they excelled at it. And gave us an amazing story, and an amazing cast of characters, and great game mechanics, and a beautiful world to explore across several different eras. Like, if Final Fantasy VI was an epic just for a long story that has a lot of twists and turns, this might be the best single story, just pound for pound, ever told on the console.
Yeah, and once again, broken record here, but amazing soundtrack. Like, every time I play it, I can't help but comment on it and think about how well done it was. And like, I'm sure we probably could have made top 5 lists just off of RPGs.
Easily.
Just so many on SNES. But, like, this is hands down one of the best ones because the gameplay and the fact, like you were saying, the time travel was done so well. Because, like, you could go back in time and open up a chest, and then when you get into the future, that chest is already empty when it could have held a very powerful suit of armor or something comparable to that. And the frog was definitely my favorite character.
The frog was an amazing character.
His Old English, his theme song, everything about him, I loved him. And the fact that your abilities can intertwine and become a stronger ability with each of the characters was awesome. And it used kind of a similar, not quite Secret of Mana battle system, but similar to it. And it wasn't just okay, everybody stands over here, and now the monsters, you line up over here, and let's fight.
Plus, you had access to dual techs and triple techs, which allowed you to combine some of your special moves into really cool moves that did a ton of damage. Like, there are so many of those that were super satisfying. And circling back to Frog for a moment, this is one of the games where I definitely encourage you to play the original rather than the re-releases, because they kind of sand off Frog's Old English in the re-releases. None of that here. Like, if you want the true character, the SNES version is the way to get it.
Yeah, the newer re-releases, he's just a boring, normal frog. His Old English was like his whole personality. It added so much to him, and when they didn't include that was like one of the first things I noticed and my biggest disappointments about it.
Yeah, and the re-releases also have some bugs and glitches that just aren't present in the original. Like, this is one of those where, unlike something like Final Fantasy IV, I would point you at the Steam version all day long. For Chrono Trigger, you gotta be playing the OG. There's no substitute.
Yeah. Definitely no arguments there.
For sure. But, like you said, it was hard to come up with a top 5 list, so now we're gonna pose the question to you, the viewers. What did we miss and not talk about for our top 5 lists for SNES games. We want to know about it in the comments below. And I also want to take a moment to thank Rob again for coming and joining us. Make sure you check out his Twitch channel. Well worth the watch if you enjoy retro games or Overwatch or Teamfight Tactics, all games that see regular play over there. Have a fantastic day, and until next time, good gaming.
See ya.
If you like what you just saw, please support us by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more great gaming content.